Good morning, and Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's nice to be back with the Road Faith Tzedek community. Thanks for having me. So today, we conclude the book of Numbers, Sefer Bamidbar, and as the priestly accounts at the end of the book tell us, among Moses' last acts as leader of Israel, he wages war against the Midianites. And according to the commentaries and context, these Midianites are not the Midianites of Yitro and Sipporah, but rather are Midianites who dwell amongst the Moabites on the plains facing the Jordan. Nonetheless, the text's choice to identify these tricksy enemies of Israel as Midianites, who lead the Israelites to debase themselves with prostitutes and to commit idolatry, to me creates an interesting, if perhaps heartbreaking, bookend to Moses' journey as a leader. Even if Moses knows that these Midianites are not like those Midianites, the tribal name itself must evoke some set of complex emotions from him. The people against whom Moses sets his army are probably distantly related to the Midianites who took him in as he fled Paro and with whom he built a family. Yet Moses is meant to wage war against them. In Parshat Matot, at chapter 31, verse 2, God instructs Moses to, quote, "Avenge the Israelite people on the Midianites, then you shall be gathered to your kin." Not just a war of vengeance, then, but a war that will usher Moses closer to death. Just chapters prior, Moses oversaw the execution of thousands of Israelites for their idolatry and licentious behavior. Now again, he must send thousands of Israelite men into harm's way and oversee the death of thousands more Midianites, knowing all the while that the end of his own life is looming. That's a lot of death, and it's a lot for a person to take in. And all of this, too, is happening at the end of a 40-year wandering, itself a punishment for the Israelites' lack of faith in Caleb and Joshua's report of the land, as much as it is a punishment for Moses' own failure to build consensus among the people that the cause was just and true, that the journey was really worth it in the end. As part of that punishment, the war against the Midianites is one of the first in Israel's new method of inheriting the Promised Land, by war and violence, rather than by a peaceful and miraculous arrival. At chapter 33, verse 50 in Matot-Masei, Moses details a grotesque vision of the coming conquest in Canaan, most notably featuring the utter erasure of previous societies and civilizations presently residing in the land. And as these instructions are laid out alongside the plans for apportioning the land, we are confronted with a tragic irony in our people's history. That the method for inheriting our promised land, war, is a part of our punishment. We do not inherit the land after a period of punishment by entering a phase of redemption and cross the Jordan nicely. Rather, the promise is fulfilled as our punishment is carried out, a punishment that persists into the book of Joshua and whose pains we still feel, I think, even today. At the end of Moses' life, he is faced with reminder after reminder of this punishment and of the failures of his leadership. What will he be remembered for? What are his regrets? Moses gets his say in the next book of the Torah, Devarim, but it's ultimately on us to consider how we live out Moses' legacy in our day-to-day. Like then, as now, Jewish sovereignty over the land of Israel is marked indelibly by war. Like then, as now, we struggle to live with strangers among us and as strangers ourselves amongst other people. In our legacy, we have inherited a tremendous amount of collective trauma. On the whole, the Torah tells us the story of how we became who we are. And I admire how our story is not just one of glory, but one of loss and challenge and pain and struggle. The historical accounts in the Torah remind us that we do not come from perfect people, and that we are not perfect. And though our ancestors played their part in erasing the history of other inhabitants of Canaan when they entered to conquer the land, we have done a remarkable job in preserving our own history, as unpretty as it is. Granted, many of us could do just fine without some of the Torah's exhaustive details, but often the heavily detailed lists, genealogies, pacts, and so on are fertile ground for meaning-making. Across today's double portion, lists abound, and in one piece, a translation caught my eye. In chapter 31, as the spoils of war are listed from that battle against the Midianites, and they're counted and portioned for taxes, the JPS translation of verse 30 reads, "And from the half share of the other Israelites, you shall withhold 1 in every 50 human beings, as well as cattle, asses, and sheep, all the animals, and give them to the Levites, who attend to the duties of the Lord's tabernacle. That first term, human being. It's a particular phrase, and it jumped out at me as a real choice, that something in the Hebrew is begging to be looked at more closely. Verse 30's Hebrew reads, "U'mimachatzit b'nei Yisrael tikach echad achuz min ha'chamishim min ha'adam." Here, the Hebrew gives us no euphemism for a person, like nefesh, soul, nor does it prefer a category like isha, woman, even though all the human beings that are being counted here are women. Rather, the Torah mentions them in the most all-encompassing of terms, ha'adam. We first come across the word Adam on the sixth day of creation, when God says to God's self, Na'aseh Adam, let's make a being, a human being, b'tzalmenu, in our image, kidmutenu, according to our likeness. These are the captives, min ha'adam, captives of the human sort from Moses' last war. They're described the exact same way as the first human being. These are reflections of that divine image and likeness that are conquered and to be divided, much like the land across the Jordan will be very soon. How difficult it is to lead a nation, and also to remember the individual mandate of each human being to recall that lesson from creation, to notice and recognize the divine imprint on everyone is an endless and essential task of being a human being. I think it's one of the reasons why religion and religious communities are so important today during this time of upheaval. It's a simple message, and yet it's a hard one for people to hear, but it's one that we bear a responsibility to speak out and carry forth. To me, it's no coincidence that we're facing a national reckoning during this season of rebuke leading up to Tisha B'Av, when the hatred evident in our polarized discourse runs rampant, just as tradition tells us about the sinat chinam, the free-flowing, baseless hatred that brought the temple down. And in the second week between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, I think we ought to settle into that rebuke a bit more. It's times like these that we should be asking, who are we? What values are we living by, and what values are other people seeing us live by? We must articulate a vision of our future and of our role in it as Jews participating in the American effort to form a more perfect union. And however we label ourselves or other people as part of our community or not, it is crucial that we remember at our core that we are all B'nai Adam, beings of the human sort, descended from the first human, a being made in the likeness of God, not to be taken captive, not to be divided or conquered. We are rebuked, we are given tochacha this week and next. But tochacha's close cousin is tshuva, return and repentance. And with inspiration from the prophet of our Haftarah today, Jeremiah, I pray that that vision be one built be'emet, in truth, be'mishpat, in justice, and b'tzedakah, in righteousness, so that all nations, all peoples, all reflections of the divine spark may bless themselves in that holiness, and so praise themselves. Shabbat Shalom. Thanks again for having me.